Last weekend, we hosted 2 town halls, one on Bainbridge Island and one in Silverdale, and it was me, Representative Sherry Appleton, and Representative Drew Hansen, so the 23rd legislative delegation. And we had over 100 people at each town hall. A lot of really good questions. We had good conversations about public school funding, about health, a little bit about healthcare, a lot about mental health, a lot of questions about the transportation budget and gas taxes. And we also had good conversations about some environmental issues, like the issue of oil being transported along rail lines. That was a question in both communities. As I said, over 200 people were there, but that's a very, very small percentage of the district. So anybody that wasn't able to make it but who had questions, we're happy to hear from you by email or call either my office or Drew or Sherry's office, and one of us will get back to you. Last week was the last week that bills were being heard in the Senate before they get passed over to the House of Representatives for their review, essentially. And so we had a lot of bills being passed last week, but the next couple of weeks are used for the Senate to be reviewing House bills and the House reviewing Senate bills. And it's also a time that we have a lot of visitors come through, people from the district. And highlights always include when kids come through. So even earlier this week, I had a meeting with some foster parents and social workers, and as well as with kids who are in foster care placement. And we talked about the foster system and some of the improvements that need to be made there. One highlight really was a group of school kids from Central Kitsap that came through with their parents and teachers. I think it was African American Day on the Hill, and we got our pictures taken and talked to the kids about democracy and what it's like to be a part of government. So that was another highlight. We love having visitors come to the Capitol. One highlight that happened today was I was able to sponsor a resolution honoring our law enforcement officers in the state of Washington. And that's a really important resolution right now. There's a lot of stress, a lot of tension in some communities. And it's important to recognize the risk that law enforcement officers take every day on our behalf to keep our communities and our families safe. And it was also a time to remind the legislature that it's our responsibility to provide resources, not just for local law enforcement agencies to function, but it's the legislature's responsibility to help provide training money so that officers can have the training they need for crisis intervention, for example, for helping how to help homeless people in crisis, etc. And it's also partly the legislature's responsibility to provide resources to our communities so that we have safe community supervision of people who are just coming out of the criminal justice system. So we have the resources we need in our schools to keep kids from dropping out. There's a whole complicated web of relationships that needs to be maintained, and it's not fair to expect local law enforcement to be able to take up the slack in every situation. So I think it was a really important resolution just to say we're here for you and we're trying to make your jobs better and your jobs easier, and we want to give you the training that you need to do your jobs well. Well, the last half of the session is typically focused on budget discussions. So we have 3 different budgets that the legislature essentially approves and reviews. One is our transportation budget, and that's been humming along, and I think I've spoken about that in earlier videos or in newsletters. We also have what we call a capital budget, and that is a budget that is dedicated to constructing things like university buildings or new schools or funding for new parks or new ball fields. So that's the capital budget. That's a whole different discussion. And then the third budget, which is always the most tricky to talk about and to agree on, is the operating budget. And this is the year, I think, that most people know that we really have to come to the table with funding for our public schools. And the goal, of course, is to have the state be providing the funding that the schools need to educate every child in the state equitably and to take some of the burden off of our local property tax levies. So we're looking at over $1 billion in new revenue, not new revenue, but new investments essentially, and where we're going to get that, whether that's new revenue, whether it's new taxes, whether it's cutting other programs and transferring it, whether it's taking money from one pot and transferring it to another pot of money. We're still in those negotiations, but that is the biggest challenge facing us, how we're going to fund the schools. So my intention is to have a video later on in session that really narrows in on the school funding issue and talks about some of the details about what the challenges are.